that very clearly in 2020-2021 offensives. And we have also seen that the troops have had a different set of rules of engagement on how to interact, if I may use that term, with the Tigrayan civilian population. The Eritrean forces have been much more to end the fact that during these 2 years of active warring, and also then after the signing of the Pretoria Peace Agreement, we have seen a difference of reactions and actions observed from over the past few weeks by EDF and Eritrea and EDF and Addis Ababa. It seems clear that the Eritrean engagement prior to, during, and after the signing of the peace agreement has had a separate track, so to say, has had a separate agency, has had a separate objective with the war on Tigray than what we have observed from the other forces, EDF, Amhara, or Afar. So the remaining question will be is how will Isaias act going forward after the so-called peace agreement? And presumably then the disarmament of TDF has just started, so-called. What kind of strategies will Isaias employ to continue and to further the destabilization of Ethiopia? But more concerned, of course, how will he continue to undermine Tigrayan development and possibly furthering his genocidal intent against the Tigrayan people? That remains to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think in your breakdown of Eritrea's involvement in the war on Tigray and the steps taken prior to November 2020 showed and highlighted the nuance behind the relationship between Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki and the mutual enemy found in the Tigrayan leadership and people. Thank you for that insight. For those of you joining us, I would just like to say as a reminder, today's webinar is organized by the Tigray Diaspora Council based in Europe. It's the first of many webinars to be organized by the Council that seek to address thematic areas under the umbrella of factors behind the war in Tigray. Today's webinar will be used to facilitate recognition of the Tigray Genocide for what it is, and garner support and promote the national interests of Tigray for peace, stability, and justice. Also, as a reminder, we'll be taking questions at the end, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat. For now, our next speaker is Dr. Hiyab Gomez-Fadek. He is an assistant professor of tourism and management and a survivor of the November 2020 Aksum massacre. He was a faculty member of Aksum University before he was forced into exile because of the current war in Tigray. His main research lines include tourism competitiveness, tourism policy and frameworks, heritage politics, and heritage economics. He's held middle-level government positions, and he is currently actively following up the political dynamics of Tigray. Dr. Hiyab will be joining us today to speak about mass atrocities. Thank you for joining us today.
I don't think he's in the room.
Okay, no problem. We can forward on to our next panelist, who's Desta Haile Selassie Hagos. Desta is a postdoctoral research fellow at Howard University based in Washington, D.C. He also manages the Victim List compilation project and manages the compilation will hand over to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Rory. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay.
We can now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Rowena. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I was hoping Dr. Hiab will talk about the qualitative aspect of the mass atrocities in Tigray, but he's not able to join us today. So I will go and talk about the Tigray Victim List compilation project we do at Tigray Media. So I will mainly focus, in the interest of time. We have many outstanding panelists today, so I don't want to take much of your time. So I will mainly focus on the quantitative aspect of the mass atrocities in Tigray. Okay. So I have four small topics. First, I will talk about the civilian casualties in Tigray, and then I'll talk about the relentless attack on humanitarian aid workers in Tigray. And next, I'll talk about the massacre of Tigrayans who were members of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. And finally, I'll talk about the ethnic profiling and targeting of Tigrayan civilians outside of Tigray. So, as you know, Tigray it's been in a total communication blackout for more than 2 years now. Despite the ongoing total communication blackouts, me and my team at Tigray Media, we have managed to collect and verify about 3,292 civilian victims, and this is before the Tigrayan Defense Force recaptured Nawada and most part of Tigray. And we have also managed to compile around 126 civilian victims after June 2021. We still have to verify about 4,219 civilian victims, and this is before and after June 2021. And this doesn't include the recent massacre in the neighborhood of Adwa in a place called Mariam Chowito between October 25 and October 31st, 2022. The brutal Eritrean soldiers massacred more than 3,000 civilians. So to go deeply into the district-based distribution of the massacres, as you can see from the pie chart or from the table on the left side, we have about 221 victims from Aksum. But I don't want to give the wrong impression to people here. This table only shows victims we verified before June 2021. And this table only shows victims, victims from one district when we have victims more than 30. So we have managed to verify 221 from Hapsu, 191 from the areas around Glomahada, 189 from the areas around Hausian, and 154 from the areas around Samber, Dobaatambien, 152, Woro, 125 from the areas of Mbasaneti, 121 from the areas of Adigrat, 108 from the areas of Kolatambien, 106 from the area of Adet, 90 Mariam Pengelat, 80, you remember this news from CNN and other international media outlets. From the area of Bora Solowa, 77, from the areas of Adahagarai, 74, from the areas of Tomaram, 74, from Europe, 70, from the areas of Dera Abai, 61, from the areas of Shire, 50, from Maikadra, 57, from Mahdara Dego. You also remember this very heartbreaking video from CNN. 54 from Gala, 53 from Chila, 48 from the areas of Shararo, 46 from the area of Hentalo Ajrat, 44 from Mike Natal, 43, and from the areas of Salakhlacha, 37. If we look into the gender statistics of the victims, As you can see from the pie chart, we have about 91.8% of them were male, and 7.6% of them are females, and whose gender is known 0.6%. And I also don't want people to get the wrong impression from this pie chart. It looks like men were more targeted than the women and girls in Tigray, but this is not true. The invading forces of Eritrea, the Ethiopian forces, and the Amhara militia and Fano, they used rape and sexual violence to break the spirits and the bodies of the Tigrayan women and girls. And as it was reported by the Tigray Health Office Bureau, more than 120,000 women and girls of Tigray have been raped. And we have panelists Dr. Hafton and Rita Hassai. They will talk about this in the next session. And if we look into the age statistics, so victims whose age are more than 70 or about 70 are 5.9%, and victims whose age are between 35 and 70 are 26.5%, and victims whose age are below 35% are 23%, and victims whose age are known at 44.4%. And if you see the age statistics, if you can see from this graph, more than two-thirds of the victims are between the age of 18 and 49, and the productivity, the median age statistics is 38. The reason why, especially the Eritrean soldiers, were targeting men whose age are between 18 and 49 is because this is called the most productive age bracket in a society. And if you read an article from the African Reports published on 31st March 2021, the Eritrean soldiers said they were ordered to kill any male over the age of 14. According to a soldier, the order they received from their superiors was to kill those who be against the war. And this reference was given to them that they were ordered to kill any male over the age of 14. But if you see in the graph, they were killing from the age of 2 to the age of 95. And now I would jump into the relentless attack on the humanitarian aid workers. We were expecting from the international community, for example, the UN, the African Union, and the international community at large, to protect the life of civilians and the life of humanitarian aid workers in Tigray, but they didn't. At Tigray Media, we identified about 28 Tigrayan humanitarian aid worker victims. Two of them were from the Doctors Without Borders. You have them on the bottom of the slide. Johannes Habla from Redam, Pedros Mikael, and 14 victims were from the Relief Society of Tigray, 11 victims from the Red Cross Society of Tigray branch, and 1 victim from the International Committee for the Development of Peoples. I think it's an angel from Italy. And we have Maria Hernandez. She is an emergency coordinator. She's Spanish, and she used to work for the Doctors Without Borders, and she's also a victim. She was killed on the 25th of June 2021 around 10 Aviati. And according to a report from the New York Times published on the 17th of March 2022, both Maria, Johannes, and Tergos were carried in this car. I don't know if you can see from the top right corner. And they were killed by the Ethiopians, and this is a witness from an Ethiopian army general. And I would like to share this very, very sad story. I could have presented a lot of sad stories out of these 3,292 victims, but I don't want to take much of your time. But this is very important. And the reason why I named the title From Eritrea to Tigray, I have a good reason for that. I will explain it later. The guy you see on this slide is called Amde Kiros Aragao Garu. He was a driver for the International Red Cross Society Tigray branch. And on the 25th November 2020, that means 20 days after the invasion of Tigray, he was driving a pregnant woman, a pregnant mother, from a local clinic to the main hospital in Adwa. And on his way to the hospital, he was stopped by the invading Eritrean soldiers. They shot him, and then they dragged him. They dragged him from the car and the woman, and then they shot him, and then they saved the ambulance. So they thought he was dead, but he wasn't. And finally, he tied his wound, and then he managed to take the pregnant mother to the main hospital in Adwa. And then when they arrived at the hospital, the mother delivered her baby safely, but he lost his life to blood loss. And what makes this story even sadder is I'm very sorry. His younger brother, named Binyam Aragao Guru, was murdered in front of his mother and his dad on the same day in the city of Adwa, 25 November 2020. He was trying to protect the properties of his family because they were trying to loot everything from their house. And both Binyam and Amdom, they were born in Eritrea, near a marketplace in the center of Asmara called Damaria. Their families were very successful merchants in Asmara. But before the Ethio-Eritrea War in 1998, way before that, they were asked to leave Eritrea and go to Tigray. So they left everything they owned in Eritrea, and then they moved to Tigray. They started life all over again. And then when the Eritrean soldiers invaded Tigray in November 2020, they took everything they had, and then they killed all these brothers on the same day. Jumping into, I'm very sorry, I'm a bit emotional. Jumping to a new topic that I would like to talk about is the assassination of Tigrayans who were members of the Ethiopian National Defense Force. Like my previous panelists said, was Professor Shetu Trombol and Professor Melhami Tadesse. The war on Tigray started before the war on Tigray, actually. And before November 2020, Abiy Ahmed started to hunt down and arrest all Tigrayans who were members of the Ethiopian National Defense Force, both within Ethiopia and those who were deployed outside of Ethiopia and for the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Somalia and in Sudan. So as if arresting them or detaining them unlawfully wasn't enough, on the 21st November 2021, the Ethiopian government assassinated more than 100 Tigrayans who were members of the Ethiopian National Defense Force, only in one detention center. I'm talking about Mara Baya. A report by the Washington Post is going to be released sometime, I think in 2 days, either today or tomorrow. It was supposed to be released 3 weeks ago, but the editors, they was too delayed because of the US midterm election. So we have a military rank, full name, their ID number, and their EMDF unit for about 83 ethnic Tigrayans. As you can see from the pie chart, 98% of them are male and 2% of them are female. Not only this, Tigrayans outside of Tigray were ethnically profiled. This slide, I have 4 photos. The first photo is Professor Ma'arik Amar Abaha. He was a professor of chemistry at the University of Bahar Dar. He was killed by the Amhara militias in Fano on the 7th of November 2021 in Bahar Dar. The second photo on the right side is Haile Habano. He was a mathematics lecturer at the University of Waldo in the same. He was killed on the 22nd of October 2021 based on his Tigray ethnicity. And the third photo on the left, on the top is, on the bottom is Burhanu Gide. He was a sports science lecturer at the University of Warsaw, and he was killed on the same day with Haile Havanam. And we have Hadjiros Girmay on the bottom right. He was an investor. He was detained on the 19th of November 2021, and then they killed him while he was at the Elite Invitation Center. And you can read this report at The Guardian, published 20 February 2022. I could give a lot of very sad stories, very sad stories of the victims, but in the interest of time, I would like to conclude with this slide. I know this is going to be a tough journey, to be honest. I mean, to ensure accountability and justice for all the victims in Tigray. It will take us a long time, and it's going to take us a lifetime healing. But no matter how this journey is going to be, our struggle for freedom, justice, and accountability will continue. And thank you so much. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing your incredible work and that of the wider Takat team. It's often distressing, but much needed work of compiling data of those who have been tragically killed in the past 2 years. Takat, as many of us know, has been a steadfast and consistent platform in chronicling the war in Tigray. Your work has been crucial and it's needed for attaining justice and accountability for all those who are no longer with us. Desta has also been working tirelessly in organising today's webinar, so thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Alex Dewal, who will be speaking about starvation as a weapon of war. Professor Alex Dewal is a writer on humanitarian issues, conflict and peace, and an expert on the Horn of Africa. He is the Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation and a research professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at the University of Massachusetts. So I will hand over to him to speak. Thank you.
Let me check, Rory. Give me 2 minutes.
Sure, no problem. I have said earlier, but we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So I would advise everybody to write your questions in the chat box, and that way I can compile them at the end and present them to our panelists. So please feel free to do that.
We'll join in 1 minute, Rory.
Okay, brilliant. For those joining again, this is organised by the Tigray Diaspora Council in Europe. It's one of the first webinars to be organised about the war in Tigray, and hopefully we will have more coming to cover other thematic areas that we haven't covered today. There is also a continuation of today's webinar tomorrow that will be moderated by Melat Abtu and another wonderful selection of speakers. So bear with us as we wait for our next speaker. Thank you. please do write your questions in the chat bar.
Alex is in now, Rory.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
You can enter it in now.
Okay, so we have Professor Alex Dewall joining us. I'll just briefly touch up on some of the points I mentioned earlier. Professor Alex Dewall is a writer on humanitarian issues and considered an expert on the Horn of Africa, and today he will be discussing starvation as a weapon of war in Tigray. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I could say it's a pleasure to join you all. It's a painful topic, and a painful topic especially for the people of Tigray. And I want to start by once again offering my condolences to all of you, for everyone, all the suffering that you have undergone, all of those whom you have lost, all the irreparable damage that has been done. And one of the most striking and disturbing things about starvation, the experience of famine, the experience of collective starvation, is that it's one which is not fully recognized as such around the world. It's a crime like the crime of sexual violence, in which those who are the victims of it are too often co-opted as the collaborators in covering up the deep trauma and shame that it involves. It's striking that in the case of the great famine, and it was only 150 years later that the people of Ireland began to erect public memorials to those who had suffered and died. In the case of the Holodomor in Ukraine, a famine that was inflicted in the 19th crime of starvation and the suffering and death undergone by the people of Ukraine could be recognized in public. And one of the reasons for this is that for those who have experienced the crime of starvation, the memory of what happened is so personal and so intimate and so intrusive onto the basic social norms, the basic social fabric of society and of the family. What those who survive famine often remember is not, as it were, the bird's eye view of the overall story, the narrative of what was inflicted on their societies, but they remember what happened to them as families and the humiliations that they had to undergo, the painful choices they needed to make to give medicine to one child and not to another, to turn away almost equally hungry people from their door, to withhold the food of tomorrow that they had in their household from those who needed it today, who might have come begging. And so what people recall out of this episode is not the overall crime, but their own way in which they themselves feel it as an act in which they themselves carry a burden of shame and guilt, rather like the victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And I think that the first duty of those who are concerned with starvation crimes, our first obligation is to recognize the crime for what it is publicly, to help emancipate those who have undergone it from those feelings of shame and trauma, and to allow them to say, it was not our fault. This was something that was done to us by far away perpetrators. It was a crime inflicted upon us. That, I think, is an act of recognition and emancipation. And of course, nowhere in the world in this century or in the preceding half century is this a more necessary and valid exercise than for the people of Tigray, who have undergone a whole series of starvation crimes, the destruction of objects indispensable to their survival during the occupation of Tigray by the hostile federal forces, the Amhara forces, the Eritrean forces, from November of 2020 to June of 2021. The ethnic cleansing of very substantial parts of Tigray, especially Western Tigray, followed by a protracted, concerted starvation siege made even worse by the fact that information about this was concealed from coming out to the world, and the international organizations led by the United Nations that had an obligation to report on this, to say what was happening, felt unable to do so. Either they willingly colluded with the perpetrators of this crime, or they decided, in my view, wrongly, but perhaps understandably, that in order to be able to continue their humanitarian operations, they would decide to bite their tongues, to close their mouths, and to remain silent. A decision that perhaps would have been justifiable had they been providing significant humanitarian assistance to the needy. But sadly, as they went, they were simply trading away the ethics, the ethical stand of speaking truth without any compensatory material assistance to saving the starving. And then what we saw in the months from the end of August through September and October was all these crimes coming to a head with the forced mass displacement associated with the joint offensives against the people of Tigray. And the fact that starvation as a crime was thereby proven to be efficacious. It proved its worth to the perpetrators in that it brought the people of Tigray to a point of unimaginable suffering where at least many in the leadership felt that in order to save the lives of further hundreds of thousands, even millions, they needed to forfeit their political agenda to capitulate. And we may have our disagreements, our disputes over the wisdom of that decision, over the way in which they carried out their negotiations in Pretoria and in Nairobi. But I think we have to respect the brutal fact that having withstood so much for so long, the people of Tigray were standing at the edge of the abyss and something needed to change. And then the last point I want to make is that what we've seen over the last month is now 31 days since that agreement was signed in Pretoria, which called for immediate, unfettered humanitarian access. What we've seen on the part of the federal government and the international community is business as usual, which is frankly not good enough. Just treating this as one other emergency, one other crisis in which the bureaucratic norms, the regulations should be followed in such a way that actually life-saving assistance is only just beginning to trickle in. And I think that is a travesty, and that compounds the crimes and the collusion in those crimes that have been perpetrated over the last 2 years. So in conclusion, once again, my condolences, my solidarity with those who have suffered and undergone unimaginable suffering, and my prayers that at least let the world recognize what has happened. Let us stand firmly in speaking the truth and documenting what has happened and seeking for some measure of justice, beginning with the very first step, which is providing that essential relief. And I thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words and for your breakdown. More specifically, the parallels between other historical famines and that of the current famine unfolding in Tigray. Thank you very much for speaking today and for joining us. Next, we have two speakers who will be shedding light on gender-based crimes and conflict-related sexual violence in the war in Tigray. The first being Dr. Haftom Wildekidan. Can I check that we have Dr. Haftom with us and able to speak?
Yeah, I think that is. But I will share a slide for you.
Okay. So as a brief introduction to Dr. Haftom, he was born in Hausen and completed his primary school education in Shararo before going on to complete high school in Kalamino and special high school in Ma'ale. He received his medical doctorate from Ma'ale University and worked as a lecturer in Ardigras University Medical School. He's also gone on to receive his specialty certificate in obstetrics and gynecology from St. Paul Hospital Medical College. I hope he's able to speak now and shed some light on gender-based violence.
Haftom, are you there? Haftom, can you hear us?
Yes.
Very good. Then I'll share the slide for you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Haftom.
I'll be going to the next month.
Yeah.
Take the floor, Haftom.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to present on the obscure imagination-sponsored genocide rate in Tigray.
Haftom, are you there? Can you hear me, Haftom? Dr. Haftom? Hello, can you hear me, Zoe?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm wondering if it would be easier to for Dr. Haftom switch his camera off and just speak, if that would be easier.
Okay, Haftom, can you hear us?
Sorry for my internet connection.
Okay, it's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. If you have a very slow internet connection, can you share the video? Maybe? That helps.
I will.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. So let me know if you want me to go to the next slide.
Okay.
Can I go to the next slide, Dr. Haftom?
Yes, please.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. To begin with, I'm going to start with the definition of genocidal rape that was given by Totan Samuel Gottschalk. It is a form of wartime sexual violence, which is the action of a group which has carried out as acts of mass rape and gang rapes against its enemy during wartime as part of genocidal conflict. So as you can see from this definition, there are around 4 keywords, and the keywords are wartime sexual violence, mass rape, gang rapes, and genocidal conflict. So all of this has happened in Tibet. So according to the Amnesty International, the use of rape during times of war, it is not a byproduct of conflicts, but rather it's a pre-planned and deliberate military strategy. So sexual violence was used as a tool to perform a larger genocidal goal with a small victim. Next, please. Okay. So I want you to see this picture. This picture was taken from Deborah Health Center after Tigray war has broke out. So this health center was 100% looted and vandalized. As you can see from this picture, there was a gift from the Ethiopian National Defense Forces and Amhara Fanos and the militias, and they were written this terrible message for the people of Tigray. And it says, you people of Tigray, we have now given you a way to Eritreans that they can roast you and eat you like a grape. This was one of the chiseling act of the invading forces. Next. So when you see the magnitude of the genocidal rape in Tigray, according to Tigray government's reports, more than 120,000 women and girls were raped in the first 8 months of the war. And the perpetrators were Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Eritrean Defense Forces, Amhara Special Forces, Amhara Fanos, and Amhara Militia. And a political figure in the United Kingdom has disclosed in 2021 that an estimated 10,000 girls and women were raped in the first 5 months of the war. And around the same time, UN has reported that 22,500 women have suffered sexual violence in Tigray. So, one of the simple surveys done by USAID, as you can see from this graph, based on the category of locations where sexual violence were perpetrated based on 28 incidents. Maybe can you make this next slide? Sure. So as you can see from this graph, 39% of the women were raped while they are in their homes, and 21% of them were in military camp. 18% were while they were walking on the road, and the striking event was 11% of them were also raped in hospital setting, and 11% in open area, and 4% of them were convicted. And the other graph, as we can see, they reported perpetrators' affiliations based on the incidents involving 144 reported perpetrators. And as you can see, 44% of them were Ethiopian soldiers, and Eritrean soldiers were 33%, and 11% of them, they don't know who raped them. And 6% were Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers, and the remaining 6% were Amhara militias. And the third graph, the pie chart, when we see based on whether the assailants were multiple
lost Dr. Haftar?
It seems like that way.
Okay. Perhaps we can wait a couple of more minutes for him to come back.
Okay, let's do that.
While we're waiting, I see that more people are adding their questions to the chat bar. So we're encouraging more people to do so, to present at the end. I said earlier as well, there will be a continuation of today's webinar tomorrow with an equally as impressive list of guests and speakers. So please do join us for tomorrow's webinar as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you for joining us.
So, in the case series, we have treated 76 cases of sexual violence perpetrated by Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers from March 29, 2021 up to June 7, 2021. And I'm going to highlight some of them, but remember this is just the tip of the iceberg. Next. So case 1, a story of STN. She was evaluated on day 11 in the month of 8, 2013 Ethiopian calendar. She is a 16-year-old student from Bukola Tangen. She was gang raped by 2 Eritrean soldiers after they entered her home breaking the fences. One of them was pointing his gun to her, ordering to undress herself, and she tried to resist, but the other came and undressed her forcibly. She suffered excessive vaginal bleeding and she was unconscious for a specified time after she was being gang raped. And hours later, she found herself thrown undressed and she was bleeding continued for 24 hours. And it was impossible for her to go to health care services as movement was very impossible and she was scared to be victimized again on her way. And she had also difficulty to sleep. She had also depression, pain during urination and defecation. She had also suicidal attention and she was brought by NSF outreach team. And after she reached to our hospital, Tigray General Hospital, she was having a sexually transmitted illness and she was being treated for that. And she was put on psychological treatment for psychiatric stabilization. Next. And case 2 is the story of Gigi and her friends. She is evaluated on May 16, 2021. She is 20-year-old grade 10 high school student in Mabala. They were both from the same village around Abihalti and worked as youth house waiters as there was no school due COVID-19. After the war has broke out, they lost their job and decided to go to their families. And they started traveling on foot with their additional boy who is her relative in her village and stopped by a group of Ethiopian National Defense Force soldiers on their way in a place called Hagar Salam. And the Indian soldiers separated the boy from the girls and the girls were taken to a military camp and they were gang raped for a week. And nobody knows where the boy is in during that time, and nobody knows whether he is alive or not. Next. This is one of and her mom has disappeared from the village and nobody knows where she is and Carabao. So this child had sustained conquered by the assailants of the Eritrean soldiers. Next. The next case is case 4, a story of KB. She was evaluated on May 27, 2021. She is a 23-year-old primigravida is first-time pregnancy. She was raped by 5 ANJ soldiers on the first day after Abiati fell under ANJ, and the soldiers locked her in a room and gang raped her for a week, and she was unconscious and she was thrown out on the street. One of her relatives took her to villages where there is holy water because there was no facility during that time. She had met
I think we may have lost him again, so if we can bear with him while he retrains us.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can. Can we continue?
So this victim was also one of the sexual violence victims that she was having the trauma of sexual violences in Abiati General Hospital. And finally, she was being treated by MSF team.
Are you there, Dr. Anton?
Maybe it's
Dr. Hafton, have you joined us? Are you able to speak? Perhaps it would be better if you were to leave and then join again if you're having issues being able to speak. I can see you can mute yourself. Sorry, everyone, if you can bear with us.
Well, wait, I think what we can also do is we can go to Rita in the meantime.
Okay.
Yeah, in the interest of time, thank you.
Sure. So while we wait for Dr. Hafsam to join us, we have Rita Kasai, who is one of the other panelists who will be speaking about conflict-related sexual violence. Rita is part of Tigray Network UK and many other initiatives working to raise awareness of the war on Tigray. She's been working tirelessly the past 2 years and is now working in Sudan, where she's been based for the past 3 months. She's been documenting the testimonies of displaced women and girls who were forcibly displaced and are seeking refuge in Sudan, many of whom are survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. So Rita Kasai, if you're here with us, the floor is yours. You're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, you are the host now with yourself. Okay.
Thank you. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Excellent. Thank you, Verena. I'll start by thanking the Tigrayan Diaspora Council for organising this event and for having me and allowing me to touch on the topic of sexual and gender-based violence in the context of Tigray, at least. I'm really glad that Dr. Hafton joined before me and was speaking about all the details and the statistics of what the women of Tigray faced in terms of the sexual and gender-based violence, and the conflict-based sexual violence, sorry. And I'll repeat some of the stuff that he said, but it just allows me to highlight some other stuff that maybe you won't be highlighting. So the conflict-based sexual violence in Tigray was one of the most egregious and reprehensible aspects of the war in Tigray, but it also characterizes, I think, the war in Tigray. We've got very good reason to believe that it was not only a weapon of war, but a weapon of genocide. Due to the information blockade and the siege imposed on Tigray by the Ethiopian government, since the onset of the war in Tigray, the exact numbers of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence is uncertain. But conservative estimates, as Dr. Hatton said earlier, at least 26,000 women and girls sought medical care for conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray in 2021. This is a number by the UN Population Fund, and this is likely a significant underestimation because of the lack of information. Regional sources have estimated a number of around 120,000, which again could possibly be an underestimation because of the lack of resources and access that they would have had to conduct their research. So, despite these limitations, the limited information that we do know and that has been obtained by journalists, humanitarian organizations, and so on, paints a really, really terrifying picture. And like Alex Duval said earlier, it's really important that we name the perpetrators in terms of famine. In the same way, it's really important that we name the perpetrators in this case. Survivors and witnesses have shared that Ethiopian, Eritrean, and Amhara forces have systematically perpetrated conflict-related sexual violence as a weapon of war, and tens of thousands of women and girls in Tigray have been subject to, again, rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced impregnation, and enforced sterilization. These are obviously the numbers that I named earlier were very huge numbers of conflict-related sexual violence, and they highlight that the rape perpetrated against the Tigrayan women was systematic, but it doesn't need to be this massive of a number to indicate that it was done with genocidal intent. Genocidal intent can be demonstrated even if it's much less than the numbers that we've seen in Tigray, because genocidal intent is expressed. It's demonstrated with the words that these perpetrators use. So many of you may have read the article, Tigrayan Women Should Never Give Birth. It was written by Lucy Tassa, an investigative journalist, and she quoted the story of a conflict-related sexual violence victim who asked her abusers why they were doing that to her. And her perpetrator responded that your womb, who gives birth to Wayane is a term used for rebellion in Tigrinya, should never give birth. And this it wasn't the only case. I spent 3 months in the refugee camps in Sudan, as Marina said, and many of the women in Sudan who were victims of conflict-related sexual violence, but not only them, other victims of other crimes, were often told, "Where is Wayane now? Where are they? Who's going to save you now?" You know. So yes, the next point I want to make is that the sexual violence was not only perpetrated on women. Tigrayan boys Tigrayan men haven't been spared from sexual violence perpetuated by the Eritrean and Ethiopian forces. They face brutal acts of assaults meant to demean and destroy them physiologically. And to example, one Tigrayan man was being gang raped, stated each of them took turns. I don't want to remember what they did. I feel sick and angry whenever the memories come. They did this to us. They did to us the unimaginable, and they urinated on us. I just don't want to remember. I would have preferred if they shot us. This is a running a theme in for the women as well. A lot of the women would have preferred to have been killed, and something that I want to highlight again with rape and conflict-related sexual violence is that in court and generally, I think in society, it's not taken as seriously as murder, as killing someone. So that's something that we really need to consider going forward. Gender-based violence goes beyond the conflict-related sexual violence. Many of the women that I've spent with have been doubly victimized and have had to endure the trauma of what happened to them in Tigray, and then have had to flee, and while fleeing have been abused in other ways, and have had to endure all of the trauma in the excruciating circumstances that that they have to bear in the refugee camps. There have been cases again of rape on women on the road, women who have arrived in the refugee camps, but also women in the IDP camps. Many of the women haven't received any post-rape support and haven't received any access for justice and accountability as well. Women are often sacrificed in any case in families, for example. But women in the refugee camps, young girls, are, for example, not allowed to go to school because they have to help their parents at home, while their male counterparts are able to go and do exactly what they, in the horrible circumstances that they are also in, they're able to access their right to education and their right to health, because they have access to the standard hospitals that don't consider women in the, for example, in the post-rape case that I mentioned earlier. So, of course, again, somebody mentioned earlier that the peace deal has been signed, but there is no one in more need of peace than the people of Tigray at the moment. But again, there is no sign of peace in Tigray as well. I have to highlight that there are still atrocity crimes taking place. There is still violence against women, and a real end to the conflict still needs to happen. But in light of the peace deal, if we get a real post-conflict situation in Tigray, it's crucial that we consider where women will be in post-conflict. I think that there are studies to suggest that domestic violence and things like that are really rampant post-conflict, because soldiers return home really traumatized, women are equally traumatized, and we have to ensure that there's things in place for that. But again, for that to happen, we need the conflict to actually end, and violence against women in conflict, so the conflict with sexual violence, to stop first. So I'm going to stop there, Renee. If that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you also for the breakdown of the nature and the gravity of the sexual violence weaponized onto the Tigrayan population, and the nuance behind what constitutes genocidal intent behind sexual violence, and that the amount isn't necessarily indicative of intent as opposed to narrative behind the violence. Rita also touched on a really important point that I feel is oftentimes missed or neglected due to possibly social norms or taboo, that young men and boys have also been subjected to the same unimaginable violence and require the same psychosocial support that is extended to women and girls. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we've decided to present some of those questions to panelists now and present remaining questions at the end of the discussion. Some of the questions in the chat bar have been listed to who they would like to answer the question. The first I will pose to Jesta, who presented about the Taka's Victim Compilation Project. The question is, in collecting the list of targeted Tigrayan civilians, who's working to hold perpetrators accountable? And is there a point of contact a person or group we can reach out to support them? Jesta, could you answer this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Rowena, and thank you so much for the question. To be honest, the reason why we started documenting at Tigray was given the circumstance. I mean, the government of Tigray was not able to do the documentation from Tigray, and Tigray was under total communication blackout. So we had a couple of ideas when we started documenting about civilian victims. One is to bring the story of Tigrayans who are going under genocide to the international community. Two is, like it's mentioned in the question, to hold the perpetrators into account. I mean, at the end of the day. But we have been collaborating with the commission established by the government of Tigray, in Tigray. So hopefully the government of Tigray will start a formal procedure for the accountability purpose, but in the diaspora we can also use it for advocacy and in terms of holding these perpetrators into account. So we've been in contact with people from the human rights organizations, Amnesty International, and the international media.
Thank you, Jesta. And for Professor Tronville and Professor Alex, who are both here, a question has been posed asking, what do you think Tigrayans in the diaspora, in particular, and the elite in general, collectively lack in fighting against the genocidal war declared on them? What do you advise to be improved, and some strategic tips on advocacy and diplomacy? For Professor Tronville and Professor Alex Dewald, who are here.
Alex, do you want to go first, or? Well, let me start in case Alex is busy. I think you're doing great as you do. In this seminar in itself is a proof of that. The fact that you need to continuously disseminate information about the situation in Iran as it is today going forward, but certainly also what has happened over the last 2 years in terms of atrocities, which we have heard testimonies on now. You need to actively engage with your local governments wherever you are in the world, and we know that Tigrayans now have been dispersed again all over the world as new refugees. I think it is particularly important what Jesta and others are doing in terms of gathering and collecting hard evidence on the atrocities which have taken place. Because hopefully sometime in the future there might be a process of juridical accountability of what has happened. I'm not that optimistic in terms of what the Pretoria Peace Agreement outlines in this regard, but we have to wait and see. Things might change, if not tomorrow, maybe 5 years, 10 years, whatever, down the road. These evidences are crucial in terms of addressing and making people accountable for what has happened. But in terms of engaging and continuously trying to influence the international media discourse, it is important for all of us to try to write and to comment and to to inform journalists, news outlets, and local authorities, politicians, wherever you are, about the situation in Tigray, for them to also take it up through international channels. We do see, however, that after the signing of the peace agreement, and thank God, it is kind of a move towards silencing the guns, that it is less interest to address what has happened during these 2 years, because that might in itself jeopardize the implementation of the peace agreement. So that's always the dilemma, peace or justice, in these kind of processes. And we just have to take that into account. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Trunvold. You touched on a really interesting point that kind of leads to the second question, which I'm leaving to any of the panelists to touch on. So the question is, do you think the Pretoria Peace Agreement has negatively affected the recognition of Tigray genocide?
I can briefly start on that and let them go. To be frank, yes, I do. And that's what I ended my former intervention with, that in all kind of peace processes, when either in civil war or in bilateral wars, when it comes to accountability for the war crimes, for the crimes against humanity, or even in this case, genocide, which have occurred, in order to create forward-looking peace, backward-looking atrocities are forgotten. And although in the Pretoria Agreement it is a brief clause about accountability, but it's not elaborated, it's not spelled out, and it is not written and agreed that it should be, for instance, an independent international investigation into the atrocity. It doesn't say anything about what the national processes should be. It doesn't say anything about the jurisdiction over the atrocities which have taken place, where it should be anchored. Should it be a national court? Should it be an international court? Should it be an AU regional court? Nothing is spelled out. So, in my mind, well, that indicates that, again, this is an agreement of more or less capitulation from the Tigrayan authority side. It means that it is up to Addis Ababa to dictate how accountability should be meted out. And in ending such wars where it is more or less a victorious justice, it's extremely hard to see that the leadership of Ethiopia should put themselves on trial for the atrocity they have committed. That's just a sad fact. That's just a blatant observation of what we do see today. So hence, again, I encourage everyone to keep on doing the work to collect and gather the material evidences of what has happened, of the horrendous crimes which have taken place, of the mass rapes we have heard accounts of the genocide intent we have documented, because hopefully sometimes in the future there might be a context where this could be addressed again in an accountable juridical format.
Thank you for that. I did want to ask if Professor Matani would like to comment on this at all. Also, I did want to say that Professor Alex Dor had to leave for another meeting, but had been answering some questions in the chat box. He may also rejoin us later, but for some of the questions, I think he provided answers in the chat box, so please do have a look. In the meantime, Professor Matani, if you're here, I don't mean to put you to rush you, but if you would like to answer some of these questions.
It's not, accountability is not actually my cup of tea, but I can say something about it in the sense that it's true that the Pretoria Accord
much so, because one of the major end goals of the government, so at least two of them, is one is to stay in power and two to avoid accountability. One way of doing that is by taking away the international aspect of accountability, the international dimension, the international pressure, and boxing it in the African and the Ethiopian, transitional justice mechanism. So, just usurping the agenda of accountability from its international guidelines or from the UN. The second one is trying to somehow weaken and recalibrate whatever is the political authority in Tigray, so that accountability, issue of accountability would not be raised. So these were the two, political power and avoiding accountability were the main goals. You see how the agreement was framed. So that is true, but my understanding is that one, there will be political negotiations which are not, of course, the COHA is, a very, it's badly hashed and rushed, document. It includes everything, cessation of hostilities. It also contains issues of permanent ceasefire, and also even a political agreement. So, in that sense, because the focus was political power and avoiding accountability, we see a document that is very hybrid like that. But whether the Pretoria Accord addresses it or not, accountability cannot be avoided. And this is a lifetime, a generational. I don't think one agreement or one document or one actor, be it the AU or Ethiopia or Tigray government, is waiting, will have a monopoly on the issue of genocide. It's an international crime and cannot be left to one actor or one paper or one text or one document. So, the issue of accountability continues. Yeah, that's my take. Yeah.
Thank you. I did want to ask another question, and this is open for anyone to answer, even panelists that are yet to speak. The question is, how should Tigray pursue its political demands, including self-determination, amid the agreement? Anyone is welcome to discuss this. Professor Matanian, if you're speaking, you are mute.
You see, again, it goes back to the nature of this document that I have described. If the agreement was only about cessation of hostilities, it should have been about that. Just stopping the war where the armies are. Stay there and stop the war and, abandon all hostilities, including propaganda on the ground, on airwaves, and the like. But now, the political agreement is somehow included, but it's not expanded, it's not elaborated. That is the problem of this document, which means that there should be political negotiations going forward. It means the whole the status of Tigray, the issue of self-determination, the issue of, the relationship between the center and the periphery, our relations, how power should be distributed based on the condition, need to be worked out. So, for instance, the agreement for Tigray still means, status quo ante will be restored. The restoration of the status quo ante means that, okay, for the time being, we are focusing on, the cessation of hostilities, mainly the military part of it, the security aspect of it. And the political aspect of it is relegated to the side show, push it, in terms of timetable, not to compromise the cessation of hostilities, not, to impact negatively. So, the urgency to get a cessation of hostilities done, the redeployment, the disengagement is done, is decidedly being made somehow shared to the political negotiations so that they don't become an obstacle for the cessation of hostilities. Otherwise, the political aspects of the document are, if you look at the general, mentioned in the agreement, it looks as if the political aspects of the negotiations are, less and less, but I don't think so, because there are phases, and for instance, when ANDF tries to, reposition itself through negotiations with the Tigray military apparatus, obviously, the condition will become up. According to the constitution, what was the real presence of the ND? Along the border areas, how many camps, for instance, based on the constitution? Will there be 4 or 3 camps like before? What about the internal security of Tigray? How many police? How many? You know what I'm trying to say? So the constitution will be interpreted even in terms of the security arrangement itself. Then going forward, what will be the status of Tigray? What will be
responsible for the new PhD program in history and cultural studies, and then went on to become an adjunct professor at the Department of Anthropology at Malala University, and has published over 200 academic articles. It's a very lengthy bio. I'll hand over to you if you're ready to speak now, Professor Wolpert.
Yeah, thank you so much. I should just mention, currently I'm affiliated to the University in Jena in Germany, and as a postdoc, as a researcher, and I'm guest professor in Warsaw. So I'm talking from Warsaw, where there's also a very interesting center of Ethiopian studies. So as you see, I am starting from Ethiopian studies. Ethiopian studies is a difficult term, but it is mainly focusing on culture, cultural traditions, historical sources, cultural sources of the most different kind. It also includes the study of ancient and current languages of the Horn of Africa. So my focus is rather on the setup of culture. While studying the setup of culture, I'm also focusing very much on what culture means for society. What is the interaction of different groups within the Horn of Africa among each other, using patterns of culture, patterns of conflict, and patterns of communication, patterns of cooperation. As it was very rightly said by Professor Matani in the beginning, I think that's absolutely crucial. Even these wars, even these conflicts are systems of communication. And so when we look at wars, we always have to try not only to describe the atrocities, but to ask the question, what is the meaning of war? What is the sense? We have to make sense of it, even if it's extremely painful. Because wars are not just happening out of nothing. They are not happening because of just some evil actors. That would be a misperception. They do not happen in the form of natural catastrophes. They do have to happen within a sort of setting of political actors acting on the basis of cultural structures and sometimes quite ancient political structures. So I don't want to go too far, but what I want to suggest is that we always have to look at the structure of war. While war is occurring, not only at the very specific actors of war, while this is absolutely necessary. The actors of war are those who commit the crimes, who take decisions, who could take decisions also in another way. So there is an actual ongoing decision-making process in war, which needs accountability. But beyond that, we do have structures of war which even make the repetition of conflicts sometimes unavoidable if these structures are not understood and not studied. So here I'm in the center of culture. If we look at the bloody actions of war, we usually look at the concrete victims, which is absolutely justified and absolutely necessary. The concrete victims in the sense of individual suffering and being killed, being raped. In the course of this, let's say, shock, we sometimes underestimate the importance of attacks on buildings, on cultural artifacts, on manuscripts, and on religious sites. And this is what I'm talking about now. And as Dr. Hagos is not here, he had asked me, because he will not be able to join due to internet problems, also to cover some part of his talk. As it was short notice, I'm not totally able, but I will try to mention some aspects. So, culture, the role of culture is an indication about what is the war all about. If in a war, specific infrastructure is attacked, military infrastructure, specific political centers, this says something about the war and about the intent of the war, the actors of the war, and the rules of the war. If, however, civilians are attacked, children, women, and significantly cultural sites, religious sites, it also says something about the character of the war. And I try to make some suggestions which should be part of the debate in the sense of how could this war go so far. How could this war be so radical? How could this war change into, according to the official narrative, a war on specific political groups, immediately change into a war against an entire population? This is why the term genocide has been repeated many times. There have been a lot of debates about it. But what we can say, especially if we look at the many levels of attacks which were carried out during this war, we can say from the very first day we have observed an attack on the people, and the attack on religious sites, cultural sites, are a very strong indication. So for this, what we have to see, shortly look at what do we know. This is something I had hoped to be presented to you by Dr. Hagos, but it is well documented by a number of Tigrayan circles of scholars, including the GTS, the Global Society of Tigrayan Scholars, who did a tremendous work, an amazing work on the documentation on damages on sites and attacks on sites. So just some examples. We have, for example, one video. It was taken by some young peasants in the Wukro area, and this was in the moment when we got satellite calls and other messages very often through satellite internet, and that was very difficult. Messages of distress. Me and some colleagues, exiled colleagues from Tigray and others, we got messages that the Eritrean army is moving from the north, from Adigrat towards Wukro, with heavy weapons and heavy shelling of any settlement in front of them, causing a situation of chaos, of distress, and making the civilians flee. So they were basically shooting their way free for further military movement. But if this was the case, this sounds somehow logic in the military sense, shooting their way free to advance quickly. But if this was the case, they should not have attacked cultural sites. But that's precisely what happened. And the video which we have is a very important indication, because in the moment of the advance of the Eritrean forces, we have seen on this video, and it was also reported from different private sources, that there was a direct attack by artillery on the separate side of Kadus Amanuel, the monastery, which was basically an Aksumite foundation, an Aksumite monastery, Kadus Amanuel, which was quite separated from this main street, located on a pointed hill, and you saw on the video, if you understood this movement of lights, the movement of the people talking also about what they are seeing, you saw that there was a direct attack on this monastery in a remote area, totally outside the reach of the army itself, isolated on a hill. In fact, a pilgrimage site, which is very typical for the pattern of religious sites in Tigray. Sites of reclusion, sites of refuge, sites of isolation from worldly affairs, including isolation from the dangers of war or protection from the dangers of war. So this video is a visual evidence, but we have a lot of reports, so I will not list them here. Some of these reports and photo documentations show us damaged roofs, damaged paintings, looted manuscripts, damaged manuscripts, partially burned manuscripts. I should mention also the damage of the roofs of the different buildings of the Mosque of Nagash, which is the most ancient site of Islam, we can say worldwide, because this was the place of refuge of the followers of Muhammad before they were able even to create a religious center in the Arabic Peninsula, because that was in the very first phase where they were looking for asylum, and the king of Aksum at that time, according to the historical and graphical narrative, has granted asylum. This story is important because it reproduces one pattern which we know very well from cultural studies of Ethiopia and of studies of the Ethiopian society. There is this idea that groups in danger have to be provided places and sites of asylum. So there is a very strong idea in the social fabric of the Ethiopian state to provide places of asylum where those who are not participating in conflict, where these places of asylum should be granted. There is a structure of peace in the midst of conflicts. This is what I want to say. In the Ethiopian political fabric, we do have this very strong tradition of separation of the worldly sphere and the spiritual sphere, or the religious sphere, in the sense that war belongs to the worldly fabric of the state. Killing is part of the state traditions in the sense that this is the worldly part of the state, while at the same time the society is relying its stability and relying its also spiritual stability. It's relying itself on the possibility of taking refuge, of not being attacked in this area of worldly affairs, of worldly conflict. So there's this separation of two spheres which are respected in the sense that these places of refuge are the basis for future build-up of society. These are sites of reconciliation. These are sites of negotiation. If we look further at the function of such sites, and that's very important to understand what's going on and what was going on during the last 2 years during this war, religious sites in the Ethiopian context are places of holy water, of tzabel. This is where people are taking refuge in times of psychological crisis, personal crisis, and health crisis. They seek healing. They seek body healing, and they seek spiritual healing. They are very practically, as I said, places of asylum. Someone who has committed a crime, even a very, very serious crime, can take refuge traditionally in such a site and will not be harmed. So this will be the beginning of a process of negotiations. This is places of prayer. This is places of teaching of values, of knowledge, of traditional knowledge of the society. So these are the very centers, even if they are separated from the worldly sphere, these are the very centers of the permanent fabric of social stability and possibilities of negotiation, including the negotiation of differences. So what does it mean that advancing armies are attacking exactly such sites? So this is the key question, and I just, in the interest of time, will suggest some readings of this. If such sites are attacked, the conclusion is that this traditional fabric of Ethiopia is the target of the war itself. The war is not targeting only Tigray. The war is targeting the idea that there is difference, the idea that there are places of refuge, protecting those who have committed crime, those who are in difference, even in deadly difference and bloody difference with other groups. So this fabric, this traditional fabric of separation of war actors from others who are supposed to become the enemies of these war actors, this mechanism of mutual protection from each other is a target itself. So what does it mean? It means that there's an idea of total annihilation of those actors and of those elements of the society which protect negotiation, which protect the idea of difference, which protect the idea that spheres of protection for anyone in the society who does not agree with some leading structures, these sites are the enemy themselves. So that's one aspect which I believe is to be seen here. There's this idea of annihilation, of removal of the other. It also means there's an idea of total victory. This looks like that. So what is the message to the local population? The message is you are alone. This is again a very important message. No one will come to help you. What happened also on holidays, on saintly holidays? We know the massacre of Mariam Dingalat, we know the massacre of Aksum, quite exactly 2 years ago, which happened on the most saintly days, on the day of Kalisti Mariam, which were the moments of exactly what I have tried to describe before, moments of peaceful gathering of anyone, which always helps to put differences aside and reconcile. This is the exact political function of such religious festivals. And exactly on these religious festivals, there were attacks on the sites, and it means also on the people themselves, with high number of victims, as we had heard before. So the message here again is these mechanisms of the society to reconcile, to have a sphere of peace, is itself removed, and which we can say is a sort of new level of warfare, a sort of absolute warfare. Even if, and this is also what I want to underline, I have observed a lot of actors who did not follow this kind of pattern which we can observe. We have a lot of witnesses also from the side of the perpetrators. We have people who said, for example, during discussions among the army, why are we doing all this? People asking their superiors, we are not here to fight against the people. We have even seen some video recordings of such kind of questioning. So we cannot say that this idea of absolute war is successful. But we see this structure, the idea of absolute war, which is perpetuated also using the military machine, the military institution, with a reasoning, using a reasoning which covers this real intent. I give you one example. When the monastery of Debre Damo was attacked by shelling, by artillery shelling, we know that one monk had died. Part of the building structures have been damaged. The main structure, luckily, has not been destroyed, which is the Aksumite structure of the Debre Damo monastery. So what could we find out through questioning of people who were talking with witnesses, including who were talking with the soldiers who later entered into Debre Damo, explaining their action? Quite interesting and quite important. They said, we had the order by our superiors to attack Debre Damo because that is the hiding place of Debre Zion. This is the hiding place of the leaders of Tigray.
Sorry, Professor. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wondered if we could move on to the next speaker. So if you'd like to wrap.
Okay, very good. Let me finish with the last phrase because that's part of the conclusion, and I think very important. And then thank you very much for reminding me of the time. So the idea was we have to attack the leaders. Now we see, this is ordinary soldier speaking, there were no such leaders. They said even sorry, they apologized. So we cannot say that entire institution of perpetrators, which means the army, is behind this idea of absolute war. But we see the structures of order, the structure of command, which even uses this institutionalized system of command in order to perpetuate acts of cultural genocide against the local population. So we should not conclude that the entire Ethiopian state is behind that even the entire Eritrean state is behind that. It is a specific system of thought, a thought of annihilation, using even moderate forces within the state. Last point, question, which is for further discussion. while this is an attack on the inner fabric of the society of the Tigrayan society with a very strong and very devastating message, it may also mean it's the idea that through such action there will be an extreme rift within the societies, leading to more conflict, which empowers those who are using conflict for increasing their control of the region. So it is also, it seems, an instrument of increasing conflict, not solving it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Albert, and thank you for joining us from Warsaw. You mentioned and you discussed, which I found very fitting, the intentional destruction of cultural sites and heritage, speaking to the genocidal and oftentimes radical intent by its perpetrators to attack and humiliate the Tigrayan people, or as a result, attack and humiliate the Tigrayan people. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive breakdown, and thank you for those of you who still remain with us throughout this webinar. Our next thematic area is institutions supporting the Tigray Genocide, specifically Ethiopian higher education. We allotted 2 speakers to touch on this. The first being Goitom again, if he's here with us. I can provide an introduction about Goitom. He is a lecturer at Makala University, and he's currently an international officer at Thomas More University in Belgium. He established and led the international office of Makala University between the years of 2014 to 2021, during which he managed international partnerships, staff and student mobility, recruitment of international students. He also witnessed the start of the devastating war in Tigray, which broke out while he was in Makala, and has provided his testimony and situational updates on Tigray on various occasions, with the main focus on the effect of the war on universities in Tigray. I can see Goitom joined us today, so thank you, and I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you very much, Rowena. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's an honor, I would say, to be here among us, all these panelists who have been doing great job in the last 2 years, telling the story of on behalf of the people of Tigray. And I will today be presenting a little bit about the perspective from the higher education system in Ethiopia. And I also thank Tighat and many scholars who have been doing a lot of job with regard to documenting what's happening in the higher education system in Tigray as well, because I relied on their information as well to build up my story. And my presentation will be a short one, brief 10 minutes one, and it will be quite a background and the base for what will follow by Professor Jan Nissen. I will specifically focus on background of higher education in Tigray, provide a bit of a testimony from my side and some examples of what happened after the war started in Tigray in that sphere of higher education in Ethiopia. So it's always good to tell the story of the universities in Tigray, that they have been doing a magnificent job with regard to solving local problems, not only capacitating Ethiopian workforce, of course, but engaging in very large projects of solving local problems, expanding infrastructure within the region. They have been hand in hand with the government in Ethiopia and the regional government in Tigray in expanding all sorts of development and fitting to the growth of the nation. So it is important institutions with quite global scholars working in them, and they have been capacitating a significant size of the Ethiopian workforce. So that's a key point, because as much as the role of higher education is concerned with academics, research, and community services, the universities in Tigray are quite exemplary to that side. So taking an example, Makala University is a university of 33,000 students, 10,000 employees, out of which 2,300 are academia. And we have expanded from a very small start to become a university of 6 large campuses with 7 colleges and 11 institutes that housed close to 365 programs, out of which basically we had 65% of the programs on postgraduate, which meant really focusing on the priority areas when it comes to boosting the capacity, because many universities in Ethiopia would provide undergraduate programs, but very few do so with regard to postgraduate. So as far as focus was concerned, we were on the right track and really doing a lot with regard to internationalization. Perhaps one of the main sources of information when it comes to the Tigray war is the Haidar Referral Hospital, which is actually functioning in almost in a very limited size of it. But Haidar is also one of the colleges under Magala University. It's of course, details will be provided by Professor Tony, I know, but it is also one of the hospitals run under the College of Health Sciences under Magala University. Everything that we tell here as far as what universities in Tigray have faced is not only about Magala University, it's also about Aksum University, Adigrat University, and Raya University. The thing is, we were called the Northern Cluster of Ethiopia as far as classification of universities in Ethiopia is concerned. We at Samara University, and we are universities of 5 group called the Northern Cluster. So supporting and working with each other is pretty much the culture. And if we talk about atrocities and devastations, these universities, as Magala University, may have actually faced even more worse situations in their premises. We have been internationalizing, expanding greatly, working with international actors. There is a saying that higher education is perhaps maybe the only sector where you would be talking about all the sustainable development goals and about the pillars of it with regard to partnership for the goals. So the way I see it, international actors, government interventions, all of them go through the higher education system with regard to implementation, with regard to supporting it scientifically. So universities, as comprehensive in nature as Ethiopian universities, similarly to the Tigrayan universities, are responsible for implementing large-scale projects and taking them to the success. That's why you can consider them the backbones of all these development activities, because they are connected with all activities and supporting governments and supporting the people and doing a great job capacitating the human resource in the country. So I just wanted to say, perhaps by now everybody must have understood all these goals are jokes in Tigray. If they don't apply, you cannot talk about poverty, you cannot talk about hunger, you cannot talk. So the fact that the higher education system is targeted deliberately is actually part and parcel of the genocidal mission by all actors. That's what I believe, because it has literally resulted in a collapse of an entire system, and that was the intention. We have been very active actually in national and international stage, organizing congresses and seminars, including on the topic of conflict resolution before the war happened, jointly with the tourism ministry and many others in the country, also joining with many universities. So if the role of peacemaking is considered, universities in Tigray have been at the forefront doing so towards that. We have been hosting various large-scale international conferences. Specifically, Dr. Wolbert has been one of the proactive ones in organizing many international seminars, bringing them to Magala University, and then, of course, gathering hundreds of scholars on Ethiopian studies, actually gathering in Magala. So that has been the story of Magala as far as Ethiopian activities are concerned. So right a few weeks before the war began, the very first 6-7 months before that, we have been having the COVID pandemic, and universities in Ethiopia have been shut down. So we had no students. Quite a few months left to the war, the beginning of the war, there was Desert Locust Swarm where everybody was fighting, and universities have been quite busy putting resources and mobilizing their community towards that. It was a high time to help the community as far as resources were concerned. We had limited and we used everything towards that. Another thing to mention is before the war started, actually that very week, students were returning. There was a decision nationally that graduating class students return to school, and then with quite some precautions, school resumes, and that was the decision taken. And we had students, close to 4,000 of them, in campus when the war started in Tigray. And what have we witnessed after that? Well, the war in Tigray has actually disabled everything relevant and brought all the worst things to normalcy. So that's what happened. So we had looting and destroying infrastructures in Tigray universities. Significantly, the very first victim was Adigrat University, that faced a lot of looting and destruction by the Eritrean army. Also, staff, teachers and students being killed in deliberate attacks. And similarly, there was a lot of influx by internally displaced people into Manila, into the big cities. So the universities had the burden of really supporting IDPs. All schools were down, shut down. There was no active education at that time, and in fact, perhaps until now. And all projects halted. Large-scale international projects were on hold. No connectivity, and of course, any normal academic and research activity was put down. This was the week when we were receiving students, and we have been sharing our stories about receiving our students. You can see from November 2nd, 2 days before the war started, students were coming to campus. And then later, on November 19th, when we managed to get through some communications through the UN, we posted about the situation in Tigray, which actually has brought a lot of anger and feedback from the Ministry of Higher Education in Ethiopia, with a lot of targeting of people and perhaps the consideration of the university as an enemy that we proved with following activities. We immediately started to coordinate relocation of students back to Ethiopia to send them to safety. We worked with UN and with many others. There were occasions where the Ministry of Higher Education would promise us to be in the Afar border and no buses would be there. So with that limited fuel, we would take 10, 20 buses of students to the Afar border, and then no one is there to take them. They had to return back to Manila. It was a very difficult situation, but the community of Manila University, alongside the students, had managed that terrible time to put at least one meal a day on their table until they left the region. When there was shelling of Manila town, air strikes didn't spare the university campuses. We had students dying, and it was a difficult situation where everybody, in fact, at that point, everybody was concerned, maybe because there were Ethiopian students in Tigray, and it felt like many people were concerned about the war, but then, things got back to normal and no one would care. But at this point, we have had our fair share of the terrible things that happened during the shelling of the city. Our campus of the veterinary medicine was completely destroyed by EADF soldiers, and we evaluated the worst, that it was 610 million Ethiopian per all the laboratory equipments, all high-tech active things, all computers, nothing, no infrastructure, no furniture was left in that campus. All ICT-related equipment we had, everything was either taken or destroyed purposely. Airstrike shootings, drone attacks, they became normal, and Manila University, it has been in many news outlets that has its campuses targeted. The connectivity being down, it means a lot of activities are down. I will not go to the details of what happens when the internet is not there, especially for scholars in the university, in thousands of them. The university has been reporting about continuous attacks, putting press releases to which not a single university in Ethiopia or the ministry reacted. How did they respond? Well, the information that we have at hand with evidence is good proof that campaigns of supporting the war were done by pretty much all universities in Ethiopia. Financial and logistic support to the war, military training of staff, quite bizarre, threatening of Tigrayans of revoking degrees, donation of vehicles. It is really sad to witness this, but this has been the things that they were busy about. And to my knowledge, no university has actually raised a scientific dialogue or any kind of active seminar towards solving the problem. Everybody was supporting the war. That's what we witnessed. And just 2 months ago, not even 2 months, this is from September 21st, the Ministry of Higher Education is actually donating money to the ANF in millions of it. This comes at a time when the country is saying there is a lot of more than 20 million people are starving, and then the war has to continue, and God knows where the donor money for higher education is going to in the country. Specific examples from Addis Ababa University actually forcing all employees to provide their salaries to the war when it started. This is one of the examples, and the Marcos University is similarly doing that, and of course training its staff to become soldiers. Addis Ababa University really putting message, threatening the West that they are intervening in the internal affairs of Ethiopia. Well, it's led by one of the Prosperity Party members. Perhaps he might think it's his obligation. You might see many professors in Ethiopia are quite comfortable talking about war and promoting war and becoming good examples of even being called warrior presidents. Here we have the president of Wollo University proudly telling that his university, when the war expanded, was partly attacked, I believe, and he had to come out and say this was done by students who studied there, actually enabling the targeting of Tigrayan students in his campus and Tigrayan staff members. Wollo University is one of the typical examples of how Tigrayans as teachers and students have been targeted. They posted list of Tigrayan teachers on their institutes on various social media platforms, and the two examples that were mentioned, Haile Haptom and Brown, they were killed by people around there. And of course, he's also one of the Prosperity Party members, really promoting the war and on record with hate speech and a lot of things. His staff members really joining the war and promoting. We would have wished a lot of effort could have been done to reverse this by Ethiopian universities, which didn't happen. This keeps them in a lot of questioning by the international community. I believe a lot of money that the donors give to Ethiopian universities does not end up in activities, and that's one thing that we have to call for the investigation of what the role has been in actually fueling the war. I would end my presentation by telling about a recent testimony that a friend gave me from Manila. We try our best to facilitate aid from abroad and then send it to Tigray through any possible way. When I asked it how our university community is, my friend told me almost half of our staff is gone. Many are killed, many died for lack of medication, and hundreds we don't know of their whereabouts. The rest of us, he said, we're struggling to feed our family. And by that, he told me many are actually in desperate situation that they look for anything that they can sell and sit on the streets. To witness this happening to a vibrant scientific community in the world, and to say nothing and do nothing, and this mainly being from the Ethiopian universities that we have worked with for a long time, is very heartbreaking for me, and I will leave it there. Thank you, Romina.
Thank you, Goitam. Presentation. As I mentioned earlier, we have one other speaker that will speak about this thematic area. It's Professor Jan Neeson, but he will be joining us in sending a video and not joining us in person. So as a brief introduction, he's a Belgian physical geographer and professor of geography at Ghent University. He's worked several years in projects of university development cooperation in Ethiopia, much like what Goitom mentioned, and has worked extensively in the Tigray region and in documenting much of the atrocities committed in this war and figures. So if we could play the video that Professor Jan Neeson sent to us.
Good day to all of you. My name is Jan Hissen, and I'm going to talk about the involvement of Ethiopian universities in the Tigray war. I'm happy to build upon contributions by my colleagues Tigray Haymanov, Ernest Gebrekistos, and Amare